All right, well, welcome everyone to the Platonic Academy of Melbourne. This is our autumn salon. So we have 5 terms a year, following the seasons and an extra one. And we're just coming to the end of our autumn term, where we've been doing 2 things. We've had an introductory course, the Reading Plato course, which is our main introductory course. And also we ran, after a bit of a gap really actually, we ran our introduction to Platonic esoteric geometry. And also for our advanced geometry students, we had an Islamic design day. And Jackson, have we actually got, have you got the thing we drew? Yeah, we'll put that one up, that'd be good. So Jackson's just putting up a bit of a display of some of his drawings, and we'll get some others. Yeah, you want to just put that one up somewhere, yeah, which you can have a look at later after the talk. So it's really exciting because geometry has a lot to do with music, which is what we'll be talking about today. So before we start, I would just like us to pause and reflect, as we usually do, with a bit of gratitude that we can meet here today and that we're in a society where we can have free speech and meet peacefully and discuss such interesting topics as this, because there are other people, and including other people that have attended our courses, who aren't so lucky at the moment to be able to be safe and to have discussions like this and to care about these sorts of things. So I would also like to reflect that we are a colonial society on stolen land, and so we're part of all this too. Okay, so Eva, Anagnostou-Laoutides, is going to speak for us today. Now, Eva is Associate Professor of Classics and Ancient History at Macquarie University. And her extensive publications in Plato include a book she published last year called Wine and Ecstasy in Plato, a metaphor of sorts, and its early reception. And we were lucky enough in our salon in summer 2025, so that would have been March, I think, last year, for Eva to give us a talk on that topic. So it was wonderful. That was a very well received talk, and so we're very lucky to have her back today, because she's heading overseas shortly. And it was very hard to get Eva in, actually, because she's so busy. So we're very pleased to have her today, and pleased to have her talking about this topic, which is very close to our hearts, because we find geometry important for Platonic philosophy. Often people come to the introductory courses and they say, what on earth are you teaching geometry for? What has that got to do with philosophy? Well, we might hear about this today, because the geometry that we're interested in here is the geometry of musical harmony, the geometry of music in Plato, the importance of it in Plato, and then Eva's going to move on and talk about it going through to some of the Platonists, including Christian Platonists, which is wonderful. Eva actually said to me, oh, I shouldn't do the Christian Platonists. Absolutely, we're right into the Christian Platonists for this sort of stuff. But I have never seen Augustine's writing on this. Very interesting to see. So Eva's topic today is music and mind games from Plato to Augustine. So give her a welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to see all of you here on a Saturday afternoon. And it's the second time that I'm talking to your audience, and it's lovely. I didn't even know. I've been working on this Plato book for 7 years, and then everybody says, oh, you know, the academy has been going on for so long. And I'm like, where have I been? But Voila, as a fellow Melbourneian, I was really, really happy that we coincided, as it were. So today we will be talking about music and theoretical awakening, or mind games, from Plato to Augustine. Music plays a key role in the educational program of Magnesia, a hypothetical colony, the constitution of which Plato outlines in his swan song, The Laws. The dialogue revisits topics introduced already in the Republic, which was written around 380 BCE, and which focused on the education of the philosopher kings and the guardian class of the Callipolis, Plato's other ideal city-state. In the Republic, Plato remains suspicious of contemporary music, famously questions the educational value of Homeric poetry, and ultimately opts for the excision of music from the Callipolis. In the Laws, however, Plato goes back to these ideas to detail an ambitious project that does permit the incorporation of music in the second-best constitution, alongside philosophy, which is characterized as the greatest music. Plato believes that musical education can foster a coherent ethos across Magnesia's citizens who, guided by the leaders of the Dionysian choir and the nocturnal council, will manage to attune to the divine principles of the cosmos. Nourished by the same perception of rhythm and harmony, the Magnesians, the citizens of this fantastic city colony, will thus become fellow dancers of the gods. Thus, Plato employs the debate on the aesthetics of music to discuss the goal of ethical training, which is to become as godlike as possible, something that he has famously articulated in the Theaetetus. Plato's arguments, as has long been suggested, draw on Pythagorean theories about the mathematical principles of the universe, which can be perceived through music. Both Plato's concept of becoming godlike and the doctrines attributed to Pythagoras continue to be discussed by later Platonists, including Plotinus and Iamblichus, enriching an intellectual tradition which had a profound impact on early Christian thinkers. Today, I will begin with an overview of the milieu in which Plato came to appreciate music as a link between earthly and divine realities. Then, I will examine the role of music in the Republic and the Laws in achieving philosophical awakening. And finally, I will trace the transmission of these ideas in Western Christianity through Ambrose and Augustine. Plato's interest in Pythagorean harmonics has stirred many scholarly debates. For example, J. Kennedy proposed a sensational theory that Plato used stichometry, the technique of counting lines in literary texts, to organize his dialogues after the Pythagorean 12-division multi-octave musical scale. Plato allegedly divided his dialogues in 12 sections that correspond to notes in the Pythagorean scale, and used consonance and dissonance of the relevant notes to undermine or support certain arguments. It's a very fanciful theory that has attracted vicious reviews, and rightly so, if you ask me, way too fanciful. Nevertheless, it shows the length to which people can go to prove that Plato was so indebted to Pythagoras. Although we remain unsure whether Pythagoras ever wrote a harmonic theory, we are certain that he inspired the harmonics developed by his followers, for example, Philolaus and Archytas. Further, despite the debate about the extent of Pythagorean influence of Plato, for example, there's a long discussion on whether the Pythagorean principle of opposites influenced the way Plato debates his various theories. Nevertheless, Plato believes in a universe ruled by mathematical principles embedded in music, which certainly reflects Pythagoras' obsession with musical numerology. Therefore, in his Philebus and the Timaeus, Plato engages with a theory expounded on Philolaus on nature, which was the first Pythagorean book to be published. Philolaus argued that the cosmos was created when unlimited elements, now these unlimited elements comprise the four natural elements, but also space and time. So along with the unlimited elements, you have limiters, for example, shapes, that are combined in a harmonious way. Pythagorean harmony, dividing all things into three classes, possibly influenced Plato's concept of the tripartite soul, as expounded, and it's familiar to us, from the Phaedrus and the Republic. Furthermore, in the Timaeus, another much discussed dialogue, Plato identifies the natural elements with geometric shapes and details the creation of the world soul and individual human souls by a craftsman or creator or demiurge, as he is sometimes referred to, who is characterized as the best of the causes. Now, this creation by the demiurge is very Pythagorean in nature because the way he does it is he combines number ratios and frequencies already prefigured in the cosmic scales controlled by the sirens we come across in Plato's Republic, which eventually, in the long run, ultimately, rely on the Pythagorean tetractys. Okay, voila. So this is the list of opposites by Pythagoras, his principal opposites, which allegedly influenced Plato. And with this, we come to the tetractys, a triangle in which the basic decad is arranged in 4 lines. So lots and lots of people already from antiquity have discussed the meaning of the tetractys and how you can project it in geometric terms and whether this was the original intention of Pythagoras or it is down to Plato that we have a geometric understanding of the tetractys, so on and so forth. So, simply put, the tetractys is the sum of the first 4 numbers that equals 10, a number which was appreciated as the foundation of all numbers, and which Lucian of Samosata, in the 2nd century, associated with the Pythagorean oath. And I've put some of it here in translation. By that pure, holy, 4-lettered name on high nature's eternal fountain, and supply the parent of all souls that living be by him with faith find oath, I swear to you. You may think these people are very serious. And indeed, they were. So, Lucian's contemporary, Sextus Empiricus, sheds further light in how the Pythagoreans, and following them Plato, understood the connection between the tetractys, that symbol that I showed you, the universe, and the soul. So he says the tetractys is the fount of nature ever enduring, insofar as the whole universe, according to the Pythagoreans, is arranged according to harmony. And harmony is a system composed of 3 symphonies. There you have number 3 again, in case you thought, where did they find the argument about the tripartite soul model of Plato that was borrowed possibly by the Pythagoreans. There are the 3 symphonies. Again, the Pythagoreans argue that it is according to the ratio of these 4 numbers that both body and the incorporeal, from which come all things, are conceived. Fashioned like the world soul and the souls of the gods, but implanted in a mortal body, every human soul contains a mixture of 3 portions: the same, the other or different, and being. These elements are mixed together according to a ratio which combines numbers and the sequence of powers 2 and 3. 2 signifies difference, 3 signifies sameness. The ratio is schematically represented by the capital. Oh, so this is Sextus Empiricus. Sorry, I completely jumped him. It's all right. But you can see that it exists. So, to go back to the text, this ratio that I just described to you of the same, the other, and being is schematically represented as the capital Greek letter lambda, or an equilateral triangle without its base, and is known as the Platonic lambda. The lambda is understood as a geometric extension of the Pythagorean tetractys and is ruled by the same principles as musical intervals, like the octave and the 12th. You see here the lambda. This is the shape of the capital Greek lambda. So this is a symbol of the soul, based on Pythagorean principles that Plato adopted and further projected in geometric terms. Furthermore, in his De Anima, Aristotle asserts that indeed in the Timaeus, Plato borrowed from the Pythagoreans to construct the soul out of the elements, which are associated with numbers, since, he said, numbers are believed to be identical with the forms themselves and ultimate principles, but they are composed of the elements. The sensible world is apprehended in some cases by mind, in others by knowledge, and in others yet again by opinion, and furthermore, in some cases, by sensation. These numbers are the forms of things. So we have various numbers which correspond to the forms of things and cater for various reactions to these forms. You can comprehend them with the mind, with the senses, and with anything in between, as long as you are suitably trained to pick up the cues. Plato's understanding of cosmic harmony in geometric terms is also explicitly stated in the Gorgias, where Socrates accuses Callicles, one of the interlocutors, of neglecting the geometric proportions of the universe. Plato's cosmology, then, is ruled by a triple mean: a basic Pythagorean mathematical or arithmetic, a geometrical mean, and a harmonic mean borrowed from Pythagoras' followers, Philolaus and Archytas. And all of these means are represented by the lambda. You may ask, why on earth does he need that geometric projection? Why isn't the Pythagorean triangle, the tetractys, good enough? Well, obviously, because the number of souls that the universe caters for needs to be all incorporated schematically in a symbol. And the Pythagorean arithmetic representation is not enough. You need to allow for infinity. So geometry is crucial. And then harmony, because numbers produce a harmony to indicate our ability to resonate with the divine principles of the universe. I think I put it in very simplistic terms, but that's a good way to go, because when you start getting involved in all the details of these theories, your mind can feel like exploding. You're not alone in that, I can tell you that much. Now, since souls are modeled on the soul of the world, which the demiurge fashioned first, their mission is to emulate the archetype by managing the sensory stimuli that affect their perception after embodiment. So you do need the senses to find your way to the archetype, because humans suffer from the need of embodiment. By encouraging his readers to attune to the principles of the universe, Plato invites them to grasp the reasoning of the demiurge, who wished all things to be good. Plato's preoccupation with numbers reflects his effort to reveal the divine intelligence, which he took to be the exemplar of regularity. Thus, his interest in cosmology does not adhere strictly, I would say, to any scientific inquiry, be it mathematical, astronomical, or otherwise. Plato is acquainted enough with contemporary speculation in these fields and the use of harmonics to substantiate scientific claims but his focus is on the ethical principles of the heavenly bodies that he believed to have souls. And this is something that he reiterates in the laws. You may say, phew, finally, enough with all the numbers. And indeed, in the bibliography, Gregory, for example, 2022 said, if you pay attention, Plato doesn't really engage with number 27, which appears in the Pythagorean scheme. And he doesn't engage with number 27, and he doesn't account for it, because he's not really interested in the mathematical principles of it all. He just uses it as a way into a different discussion, a discussion of ethical principles. The same way, one may say, that Plato uses medicine, and really you don't want to rely on Platonic medicine for any cure. So it's just a way of talking about something, an introduction into a topic, and after a while, when he feels confident enough that he has taken your attention from the thing at hand to the ethical principles behind it, he's very keen to just let it drop and move on with the topics that hold his attention. Therefore, I think this is why in the Timaeus, after he gives us the account of the creation and everything, he moves on with what he calls an eikos logos, eikos myth, eikos quasi, kind, almost mythical, mythical enough not to be related with reality, but true enough to allow us to understand reality. Whether it sits between truth and fiction, Plato is certain that this eikos myth or eikos logos is divinely inspired. It's a way to enable limited human reason to cut through into divine reason. So it's a divinely inspired account of the cosmos, designed to draw attention to the soul's original connection to the divine intellect. Similarly, in the laws, Plato takes start from natural philosophers like Anaxagoras to assert that reason is the orderer of all that is in heavens, and that traces of that reason still remain in human souls. Furthermore, the aspects of divine reason that we can still glimpse in the natural world can prepare us for higher theoretical reflection. In other words, engage as much as you can with maths and music as preparation for the soul to engage with the realities that cannot be seen with the senses. As Sextus Empiricus reports, most people believed Pythagoras to have observed the effect of music on human disposition. Yet, the Pythagoreans seem to have used music as therapy rather than purification of the soul. And that, again, is a point of debate. Did Plato really rely on the Pythagoreans, or did he just get his inspiration from that and moved on? In this context, we must appreciate Plato's use of the harmony of the spheres and his insistence on man's musical nature, in the sense that music can awaken human consciousness to the rhythm of divine reason.
Study rooms, public computers, memberships, and kitchenettes will close.
That's okay, that's fine.
Just have
It's
a
all right.
pause, and I'll shut the door as well.
We need to know in case we get locked inside. It is after the day after. So that was the long and hard introduction to geometry and maths, concluding to the fact, as I told you before, that Plato uses them as introduction to the ethical issues that he wants to draw attention to. So let us now discuss philosophers and musicians in Callipolis and Magnesia. As I mentioned at the start, despite his sharp critique of contemporary musical culture, Plato admits in the Republic the importance of music in preparing souls to make judgments based on reason rather than desire or emotions. Reason, combined with the art of the muses, is the only inborn savior of virtue remaining in him who possesses it throughout life. However, not all music is anagogic, and unless strictly regulated, Plato fears that it will encourage citizens to slip into indulgence. Thus, he vehemently rejects effeminate Ionian and Lydian harmonies, typically resounding in drinking banquets, in favor of the Dorian and Phrygian mode. Notably, the so-called fixed notes in the Dorian harmonia, E, A, B, and E, correspond to the model described by Philolaos, one of Pythagoras' followers, who employs it to represent the natural order of the cosmos and that of the human soul in an integrated harmonic system. By choosing the appropriate musical notes, Socrates and his discussants managed to repurify the state and demonstrate self-constraint, moderation, sōphrosynē, a key civic virtue. The virtue that, in another dialogue, in Alcibiades 1, Socrates assures us is the only thing that can possibly make us happy. Next, Plato moves on to discuss the appropriate rhythms or meters. Here, we are in the Republic. Here, he enlists the expertise of Damon. Apparently, the person with whom he has a discussion in the Republic at that point, Glaucon, he's well familiar with music and the theory of music, but he can't really figure out how music can relate to ethical principles. Fine, says Plato. Clearly, your knowledge is limited. Why don't we talk about an expert? Why don't we rely on what Damon can tell us? Because at the time, he was the most famous, I don't want to use any modern example that's going to be Taylor Swift, no way. Any kind of, connoisseur of music, widely acknowledged at his time. So this kind of musicologist surely will be able to resolve the problem, tell us how particular notes relate to ethical concepts. But once they go through Damon's theories, they conclude that Damon either has no idea about how to connect music with which kind of life they represent. So his technical expertise are void of ethical insight, and therefore it only serves as a scientific foundation that allows Plato to arrive at a musical definition of key political virtues, especially sōphrosynē. Sōphrosynē is described as a natural symphony of the better and the worse, about which part should rule, both in the city and each individual. Sōphrosynē is the outcome of this battle. It's a harmony. And the person that has sōphrosynē in his personal constitution, in his soul, is the ideal citizen who can teach others how to arrive at that excellent state. Equally, justice is given a musical, a harmonic definition. It can enable individuals to harmonize the three parts of the soul with each other. Therefore, drawing on the deeply entrenched musical preferences of his audiences, which appreciated the octave as the best, most pleasant of all concords, and preferred correspondence from unison, that's a very Greek cultural preference, which, for better or worse, is now at the root of Western music, Plato presents the city as a choir in which all members of the community come to sing in unison. Given the proclivity of the soul to harmony and rhythm through which it is encouraged and civilized, it is no surprise that Plato places music at the heart of civic education in Magnesia, in the laws that is, where he also offers extensive suggestion about how to regulate music in order to make sure that it is the right kind. Plato is still preoccupied with integrating philosophy in the ideal city. However, this time round, he addresses the average citizen more explicitly. Having established the association between music and intelligence, Plato argues that the philosopher who escapes from the cave, delighted by his transformation and moved by compassion for his fellow prisoners, is bound to return. Philosophers, he tells us, have a duty to share the labors and rewards of their fellow bondsmen, to guide the uneducated and those of no experience of the truth, and enable them, those with the best natures, to approach the study of what we previously claimed was the greatest thing, that is, to see the good and ascend the upward path. By incorporating music and mathematics into the educational system, Plato makes sure that the average citizen has access to this pathway. By becoming the protectors and guardians of the city, philosophers are instrumental in achieving social harmony. As Plato reminds Glaucon in the Republic, the intention of the law is to unite the populace by persuasion and compulsion and make them focus on the common good. It is by no means geared toward the flourishing of only one part of the society. But of course, later in the Republic, Plato admits that the true philosopher, being a true musician, will only participate in the politics of the eternal, the heavenly city that cannot be found on earth. So, in the Republic, he cuts us through. The true philosopher, the true musician, is not really interested in everyday politics, even though he feels that he needs to come back and help his fellow citizens. He will do that begrudgingly. In the laws, however, he seems to have second thoughts. He said, oh, hang on a minute, you can't really let the average citizen to their own device. We need to find ways, maybe not engage the philosopher in a way that later he regrets in the politicus, in the statesman. Because in the statesman, the leaders suffer from having to engage in everyday politics. Let's not engage the philosophers directly. Let's have in place an educational system good enough to guide the citizens to the right direction. Now, in the laws, Plato expands on the metaphor of the lawgiver as a musician. Nomos, after all, means both law, but also song, kind of music, genre of music. Plato is adamant that the ideal constitution and its laws can be only discussed adequately through the paradigm of music, which holds the criterion to making correct judgments, what he calls rightness in music. Music, then, becomes a major part of civic education, which is entrusted to the gods, particularly to Muses and to Apollo, but, above all, to Dionysus, because the Dionysian choir is the foremost choir in the laws. Why Dionysus, who is typically a god associated with drunken revelry, something we discussed last time I was here? Well, because being so familiar to derailing, Dionysus also knows what it takes to be in control, what it takes to be able to exercise sōphrosynē, self-control and moderation. And indeed, he is acknowledged in that capacity, not only in Euripides' Bacchae, something we discussed last time, but even much later in the Palatine Anthology. You would be surprised to find Dionysus praised as someone who knows sōphrosynē inside out. Plato defines as educated the person who has adequate choir training and is thus able to achieve a balance between his feelings of pain and pleasure. Although Plato agrees with the many that pleasure ought to be the criterion for music, nevertheless, only those who excel in education and virtue ought to judge which muse is almost the most beautiful. So here we have a serious discussion as to which kind of music do we want to allow in the city in order to achieve the right ethical training for the citizens. We know music can achieve ethical elevation, intellectual elevation, but which music can do that? Because we also know of other types of music which can achieve the exact opposite. Magnesia, we're told, ought to host 3 choirs for the education of different age groups. The chorus of the Muses for boys, the chorus of Apollo for adult men, and the chorus of Dionysus for older men, so that citizens may be instructed to discern the right kind of chorea, and chorea is a word that involves both dancing and song, from pseudo-Bacchic dances. To do that systematically, however, the principles of music that serve the ideal city must be etched in constitutional law and acquire sacred character. Citizens in Magnesia must learn to recite the law like the Egyptians do, he tells us. Because if you go around reciting the law in a musical, rhythmical kind of way, that's the best way to inscribe it, not only in your mind, but in essence, into your heart. Plato politicizes the chorus by referring to its members as guardians of the law, while he refers to the leaders or officers of Dionysus as ηγεμόνες. Ηγεμόνες is a word that means leader, but normally it has martial and political connotations. So what does it have to do with a musical instructor? It's a sign of the ethical investment that Plato envisages for musical instructors. They're not just teachers of music, they're far more than that. For Plato, the education of girls is really equally important, and he anticipates that in Magnesia, their civic presence will be felt through their participation in quiet practices and public performances. The reason I mention that is because this little bit in Plato, who castigates his fellow citizens for not paying enough attention to the musical education of girls, was hugely influential for early Christian authors like Origen, believe it or not, and Clement, Origen, all the way, and of course Philo, who comes first. Philo, Clement, Origen, so on and so forth. So
Philo, Judea, or
Philo of
Alexandria,
the Jewish Philo.
scholar.
Yeah, 1st century, that's why I say he comes first,
Yeah.
the Jewish Philo, then Clement, who reads Philo very, very carefully, then Origen, Clement's student. And this is very important in appreciating how music takes hold in early liturgy, and how women find a way of posing as devout Christians through the liturgy, and somehow reclaim their presence in the public sphere. But we can discuss that later. Back to the laws. According to Plato, since law originates from God, whom he characterizes as the greatest of all guardians and regarding the greatest things, the legislators of Magnesia emulate the gods in their attempt to establish laws. He says that much. And therefore, they accord with divine reason that exists among the stars. Thus, legislators are as musical as philosophers who focus on the practice of virtue, aspiring to become as godlike as possible. The legislators of Magnesia dedicate their energy to fostering the civic ethos that will enable their city to become godlike. And just like the philosopher in the Republic, who having witnessed reality feels duty-bound to return to the cave for the benefit of his fellow prisoners, musical instructors in Magnesia take on the role of the philosopher to guide the citizens in their attempt to philosophize. Engagement with the law equals engagement with the philosophical principles of the law and the universe. Plato famously invested philosophical progress with a language of initiation and ancient mysteries, and described the successful outcome of philosophical examination as gazing or witnessing divine realities. We know that mostly from the Phaedrus, but also to an extent from the Symposium. And he describes that kind of gazing or philosophical contemplation, if you want, as theoria. Therefore, in Magnesia, this theoria, is what I'm trying to say, is made publicly available to all through the educational system by engaging with maths and music. How do we know that? While there is no explicit reference to philosopher kings in the laws, Plato defends the role of philosophy in Magnesia through its musically trained legislators and through the nocturnal council. The members of the council are responsible for determining the ethical principles of law and their implementation through their systematic study of the virtues and through their theological debates. The members of the nocturnal council debate the existence of gods and our ability to grasp divine powers. They debate the divine origin of the soul and the rational principle that brought about the order of the universe. The council also appoints citizens of exceptional virtue as civic theoroi. In Magnesia, these theoroi are expected to travel abroad in search of wise men across good and bad states to discuss with them and seek their philosophical insights. The conclusions of this inspection, evaluated by the members of the council, are vital for the ongoing success of the state. Average citizens in Magnesia, so this happens at the higher level if you want, in Magnesia. At the lower level of the average citizen, there are many opportunities to exercise their musical criteria after completing their basic education. For example, you have the Theoria of Dionysus, which encourages citizens to drink until they learn when it's time to leave. Absolutely important. This is a way of exercising sōphrosynē, self-control, minimally being introduced to the divine principles of the law. Equally, this also makes them aware of which kinds of music and dance are appropriate for the state. In Magnesia, therefore, music is a key that enables the citizens to participate in the philosophical debates on which the city's legislation relies. This means that the citizens partake in philosophical theoria using the anagogic character of music, a point to which Neoplatonic thinkers such as Philo-Judaeus and Proclus were keen to come back to. Their efforts had a lasting impact on Christian thinkers, as we will discuss in the final section of the presentation. Okay, but before we jump to the Christians, we need to know what on earth was happening in between and how these ideas got to the Christians, because they didn't have access to Plato's books in a straightforward manner. Pythagorean philosophy, don't forget that this Pythagorean background of these ideas, Pythagorean philosophy never lost its appeal, especially in South Italy and Sicily, where Pythagoras founded his school after migrating to Croton in 530 BCE. Equally, from the Hellenistic period onwards, we have numerous pseudo-Pythagorean works produced. Why? The Hellenistic world was preoccupied with charismatic leadership and its connection to the divine, and witnessed a surge in mystery cults and soteriology, which continued undiminished under the Roman imperial period, and in the context of which opinions attributed to Pythagoras were coalescent with Orphic, Neoplatonic, Gnostic, and Christian doctrines, with Clement of Alexandria specifically discussing Pythagoras alongside Plato and other Greek philosophers repeatedly in his work in an attempt to promote the rational reading of scripture. Now, for Clement, I always come back to Clement, and he's a terrible author. He writes an awful lot, but he has a fantastic tendency. He tells you where he got his sources from. He has a photographic memory. Hardly ever he gets it wrong. So he said, the philosopher, Aristotle, the philosopher said in blah, blah, blah. You go there, there it is. So, fantastic reading, even if rather boring. But the reason he writes so much is because he is seriously concerned that the early Christian communities are going to be eroded by Gnostic wisdom, that it's going to become just another philosophical school, and in his duty as a leader, Clement wants to point out the correct way of worshipping God and the correct way of introducing all the philosophical concepts of the pagans, of the Greeks, into the framework of the Christian faith. Because for Clement, nothing happens unless you perceive it, filter it through the framework of faith. Okay, so Clement had inherited a long doxographic tradition which identified the Platonic one, the key principle of Pythagorean doctrines, with the Platonic good, and ultimately with the Christian God. Fantastic equation, yeah? Suits them all? Great. Under the influence of Philo, the Jewish Philo, a member of the 1st century Alexandrian Jewish community, Platonic allegory had become the lingua franca of Neoplatonism and was enthusiastically adopted by Clement and later Christian writers too. In fact, the Neoplatonists, who understood Plato as a recipient of Pythagorean and Orphic wisdom, engaged both with Orphic symbolism, which is cosmological, and Pythagorean, which relies on the mathematical and geometrical concepts that we discussed thus far. Among them, Plotinus, who moved to Rome in the mid of the 3rd century, 245, famously compares the one with a chorus leader. Why not? And offers a geometric account of perception, while Proclus, following him, put forward a geometric understanding of the theory of recollection. So the more you contemplate, the more you philosophize, the more geometrically your mind improves and is able to reach out to what your soul knew before its embodiment. Again, putting it in very crude terms. Both Plotinus and Proclus appreciated the mathematical aspects of music and believed that engagement with mathematics and music has an anagogic character and can lead the soul to grasp metaphysical realities. Harmonic scales correspond to a scale of virtues, gradually enabling an intellectual union with the divine nous and the attainment of moral perfection. Drawing on Aristotle, who defined virtue as a disposition, there it is, as a disposition, a hexis of the soul, which is the mean between excess and deficiency in passions and action moderated by reason, Neoplatonic thinkers equate political and ethical virtue. In actual fact, they think that political virtue is the first step to attaining philosophical virtue. They never placed too much emphasis on it, but, interestingly so, Plotinus did create a Platonopolis, which was very influential in Campania, in Italy, very influential for Roman emperors and later for Christian members of the clergy as well. Proclus furthermore, distinguishes two types of music. A lower kind associated with the educational music ordered by the statesman, and a higher theoretic kind of music accessible to philosophical minds, which leads out from perceptible harmonies to the imperceptible beauty of the divine harmony. Remember, all along it's about hearing that cosmic music. The significance of harmonic theory as part of liberal education is further advocated in the Latin West thanks to Chalcidius' translation of Timaeus in Latin in the 4th century. And I think that it was in one of the slides before. This is the tradition then that inspired Augustine, who apparently had access to the same sources as Chalcidius, including Cicero's Timaeus, and who wrote based on these sources his famous On Music, a work that we know about, but we don't study enough, and I'll tell you in a minute why. While a Manichaean, it took a long time for Augustine to come across Christian doctrines and find them more convincing than anything else. Augustine had been introduced to a form of Pythagoreanism, which likely influenced his appreciation of number as the unifying principle in the movements of the stars, in geometry, and in music. A concept he explored in his work on order, which he wrote in 386. Augustine defends the science of logic and mathematics, through which we can appreciate unity and its power in number, as evident in those things we see and do here and there every day. Furthermore, in his view, philosophy also hankers after unity, but in a much higher and more divine way. It follows two lines of inquiry: the soul and God. So you see that the differentiation between lower and higher music we just came across in Proclus continues straight almost into Augustine. He perceives a music in everything we do, but also another kind of music that relies on soul and God. Augustine, who already at this stage valued civic unity and coherence in numerical terms, as one, appreciated number and music as reasoning exercises that can train the soul to rise from the order of the sensible world and that of divine realities, into that of divine realities. Reason understood that number, both in rhythm and modulation, was supreme and all-encompassing. The following year, the year of his baptism, Augustine had a profound personal experience of the power that music can exercise on the soul, as he relates in his Confessions. Alone in the garden of the monastery that he attended in Milan, he heard a little child repeat rhythmic words to him. Nonsense little childish words, but they also said, "Follow your path, follow your path." While at Milan, Augustine was introduced into the hymn singing with which Ambrose encouraged his congregation while he protested the Arian Empress Justina by occupying a disputed basilica. Augustine's mother Monica had participated in this protest and had grown particularly fond of the hymn Deus Creator Omnium, a hymn that later Augustus would rely upon when his mother died, and this song was the only thing that could give him solace in his grief. In that hymn, God is discussed in terms of the Platonic one. Although Augustine remained always suspicious, in a very Platonic manner, of the affecting impact of music, he appreciated the great utility of this custom and was inclined rather to approve of the use of singing in the church, and so by the delights of the ear, the weaker minds may be stimulated to a devotional frame. Thus, while Plotinus, whose work Augustine had read at around that time, insisted on silent praying, Augustine, who was left disappointed by Platonism, insisted on singing the psalms deep and loudly, calling the God of justice who responded to his prayer. Music thus represents for Augustine an introductory stage of coming closer to God and experiencing his love that ought to be gradually overcome as one's faith becomes firmer. So again, music is to introduce you into the higher realities. Being the recipient of classical liberal arts education, Augustine firmly believed in the ability of music to prepare the soul of the young for the Christian truth. Thus, after returning to North Africa from Milan, Augustine started writing his treatise on music. He finished the first 6 books that discuss rhythm, including metrics, by 389. Despite his intention to write another 6 books on melody, he never managed to do that. However, he was instigated by Memorius, Bishop of Capua, who wished to obtain a copy of this treatise for his young son, and because of this exchange, Augustine prepared a revised version of Book 6, and he tells us, forget about the other 5 books. Book 6 is the most important because it doesn't deal with practical music making, but with music as a speculative science. In Book 6, Augustine returns to the Ambrosian hymn, Deus Creator Omnium, God Creator of all, and explains the numerical value of sounds and the way they affect our perception. Augustine identifies 6 kinds, genres of numbers, which you see here. The final one cannot be perceived through the body, through the senses. These numbers are immortal, and the soul receives them from God without the intervention of the bodily senses. Thus, Augustine establishes a numerical hierarchy of ascent from the transit numbers of inferior things all the way to the immutable numbers that already exist in immutable truth itself, and thus the invisible things of God may be seen and understood through things that have been made. The very same principle. Use the world around you to figure out what you can't perceive. Augustine reiterates these views in his City of God. In his City of God, where he summarizes Plato's views on the matter. Plato holds the view that this soul of Jupiter spreads and extends by musical radiance from the Earth's innermost core or center, as it is called by geometricians, though all its parts to the highest and further reaches of heaven. And thus, according to him, the universe is an everlasting living thing of the greatest magnitude and happiness, for its soul possesses the perfect bliss of wisdom. Furthermore, in his own Trinity, Augustine presented Jesus' incarnation as God's plan for harmonizing the human and divine natures, discussing the impact of Jesus' sacrifice in terms of the 2:1 ratio of the octave. It is this consonance that reverberates in the celestial city that Augustine aspires to. Let me try now and bring everything to a conclusion. Inspired by Pythagoras' interest in numbers and the numerical aspects of music, which offer a pathway for acquiring knowledge about the world and the universe, Plato developed the concept of harmony to discuss constitutions, both constitutions of human souls and of polities. The musical aspects of philosophy are repeatedly discussed in the Republic and the Laws. By achieving a common set of musical aesthetics, the community ensures its social coherence despite the differences between its individual members and eventually harmonizes itself to divine reason, fulfilling the goal that has always been becoming as godlike as possible. Plato's ideas were keenly adopted by Neoplatonic and Christian thinkers, eventually informing the thought of St. Augustine, mainly through Plotinus. Augustine reiterates the gripping power of music on the human soul, which we must use to train our spirit for embracing God's truth. By finding their place in the world, Christians can aspire to perfect peace with the one and with each other. Now, what is the problem? Plato and Augustine insist on a universal consonance dependent on the one, and therefore on a universal set of musical aesthetics. Now, that's what I would like to discuss, because to me, this sounds wonderful, but also terrifying. Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you very much. So much interesting stuff there. I haven't read Augustine's On Order. It's not a very inviting sort of title, is it?
None of them is until you figure out the connections. And then it's like, oh, but it's just like the other thing. So it allows you to make progress without having to read all that much, really.
Right, okay, well that's good. And you've also, like Effie's always coming to me and saying, we've got to read the laws.
Yes, please.
And so you've reaffirmed that,
It's
that
punitive.
position.
It's punitive, but you have to read it with Veroni's guidance and in chunks, small chunks.
It's very long, and so for a course, I've often thought, maybe we will just pull some bits out of the laws. So we might do that, and just to give people, because I know there's some people in here that don't know the tradition that well. Just that picture there that we get. So we've got Plato back at around 400 BC, and then we've got this stuff going on in Alexandria that's really interesting, and we visited there last year on our tour. I mean, it was all happening there in terms of the transmission or into Hellenistic Judaism, this whole phenomenon that happened and then kind of disappeared, all became Christianity in a way. So you've got Philo of Alexandria, who Eva mentioned, so he's Jewish, but the Jewish community there, the intellectuals tended not to read the Hebrew. They were reading their Torah in the Greek language. They had a standard Torah there, and we think, although it is disputed, he did not know Hebrew. He couldn't read Hebrew. So you've got Philo there. He's around the time of Jesus, and then the other one mentioned, Clement of Alexandria, really interesting figure who wrote that. What's Dramatis? Isn't it that huge? It's so hard to read. Stromata.
In truth. As in, blankets and blankets of it.
Yeah, it just goes on and on and on.
Sheets.
And it's not in any order. It's, oh my God, it's like, that's where you need AI to do the summaries, I'm thinking now.
Oh, very in favour of AI, I can tell you.
New students or something. He is difficult, but he's very important for the transmission of Platonism into Christianity, and that's around 200, right, AD. And then we get Origen, who we think was a student. And Origen, there is a thought, there's a possibility that Origen was in Ammonius Saccus's class, who was if you like, seen to be the founder of Neoplatonism in the class, beside, or it might have been another Origen, beside Plotinus. And so we've got this really important Christian thinker sitting there beside, or in the same generation, doing the Neoplatonism alongside we see him as the pagan Neoplatonist that we have now exists today, which is Plotinus, who's got all his works, and we have done a course on that. And so also, I suppose, interesting there is, so they are, and so the next thing to mention is, because there's another transition, because of course it's Latin, the transition into Latin, and for the Western Church, for us in the West, that was important too, and that's Augustine. So Augustine, I don't think could read Greek, but he was certainly reading and writing mostly in Latin, and he was then in the what century we got? Fifth century. So, so that transition is also important and really interesting to see there, the movement of these ideas right through from Plato. So Thank you very much, Eva. That was wonderful. I would tell you, in our geometry course, in our last class, you did the cycle of fifths there. We're going to actually draw the cycle of fifths and explain how that works. Yeah, so that's going to be.
You need a lot of luck.
What's that?
You need a lot of luck.
Oh no! It's well, you can draw it. You can draw it out on the page. You know, with 12 positions, it's fairly easy to do. So, you should come along to class. I'll show you. Yeah. Wonderful. Now, any questions or comments about
Please ask anything, even if
Yeah.
it's about bits and pieces that I didn't cover or jumped over. Give us the opportunity to cover the gaps, as it were. So please.
Just a couple of questions on clarification. Before you said that in the lambda
Yeah.
multiples of 3 was associated with sameness and possible 2.
Yeah.
But I would have thought also 2 would be sameness because basically the difference of the properties.
Yeah.
So they're all the same note on the left-hand side. Down 2, multiples of 2.
Did I get that wrong?
Down in the lambda,
Yeah,
you've got times 3 and times 2.
Times 3 though it points to sameness or difference?
Oh, I'm not sure about
Yeah.
that.
I would have thought the difference of sameness would be times 2.
In the twos.
Yeah.
I may have got that wrong. I need to go back and double check to be perfectly honest. Yeah.
And the other question was, as you mentioned, can you be critical? I agree with you. But how about grammar? Do you know grammar?
Yes.
His views about how the musical harmonies that are in the structure of the Republic.
Yes.
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 It's similar to Canadian Platonic counting syllables and so on. So he's more likely to be correct than
To be honest, I think that if there was any truth in that, and I've spent, that apart from counting verses or lines, the ancients also had a tendency of hiding things with, what would be the word in English? Acrostics. So I spent a long time trying to figure out acrostics in Ovid, a Latin poem, and failed miserably. So I think if there was any truth about Plato using stichometry, one of his later readers would have picked that up. One of his commentators would have said something or developed something out of that. And Aristotle rarely left anything wrong. To the point that the Neoplatonics are all about harmonizing the opinions of Plato and Aristotle. In that coalescence, someone would have actually let it come to the surface that this is something Plato had used. The arguments that become very complicated indeed are always somewhat flawed or involve so many exceptions that make you wonder, what is really the point of imposing this view on Plato? And because I have the experience of medicine in Plato, where after a certain point, it's really nonsense. It's the climate and character, and the character says something about ethical ability, and certain foods produce certain effects in your soul and things like that. I don't think that Plato really intended to incorporate science in a strict way in a project focused on ethics. That would be my opinion.
Some more metaphorical.
I think it is used as an introduction, but after a point he loses patience. Like he gets to 27, it's like, oh, whatever.
Right, yes,
You know,
yes.
let's move on.
Can I say something a bit about that? Yeah, so just for those people who are not following what we're talking about here, it's this extraordinary thesis, absolutely extraordinary thesis, so extraordinary that you don't want to believe it. And I have been persuaded by it a little bit, just a little bit. So,
Okay, contradict me, go ahead.
No. Well, no, it is definitely in dispute, but not the whole way, not the whole way. So what it is that you just think of all those poems, right? All the poems, they're all sung. And it's important in what hexameter and what are the different types of poetry we have in Greek?
Oh, you mean the
so you
epic poetry with the...
You sing the syllable. Syllable's important, so the unit that's important is not the letter or the word, but the syllable. So this is all about counting syllables and seeing the structure within these texts on the syllables. Now, one of them, if you like, is the octave, if you like.
Yeah.
So you get a piece of string, right, and you pluck it, and then you cut the string in half and you go up an octave, and that's your octaves on the piano with the 7, or however you count it, 8 notes in between, okay? Or 12, however you're counting it anyway. So that's your octave, your main division in music, and fairly universal across all traditions. So what's interesting is the halfway point in a lot of Plato's texts. It's an important shift. There's an important shift there, and you can go through and have a look at that. But with the Republic, these folks, and so first of all, someone presented in the 70s, and I think it was, and then someone, when was Brent, late 80s or something, came back and had a look at it. And there's other people, I heard a podcast from someone who'd done a PhD on it, checking it all up, because it's thousands, tens of thousands of syllables you've got to count. But the one that's extraordinary for me is how accurately it pinpoints in the Republic the divided line. Now, we're going to be studying the Republic next semester in June. But you count the syllables, you go to the divided line, and there's all this speculation amongst the ancients and in the moderns about the divided line, the division in the divided line, this division again. It's the golden ratio, right? Secret knowledge, you weren't allowed to tell about the golden ratio. And this is maybe an argument for why we didn't hear about it early on, and maybe why Aristotle didn't know it. I don't know. But bang, you go right there, and there it is. You start the discussion of the divided line at the golden ratio of the text. And we actually do it in our class. There's a translation into English, right? Into English where, in Penguin, where it just goes straight through. One of them has these summaries and everything. One goes straight through. And you just hold the text up to the side there, and you mark where the golden ratio is. And it works, more or less, in the English translation. But if you actually go to the syllables, it's really accurate. So, and then what happens then is they go a lot further, what Eva was talking about, and find all these other divisions according to harmonic ratios. And I don't know about them, and I'm not sure. But it's one of these things that is just so remarkable. I mean, it's so remarkable that we've got the text that maybe you don't want to believe it, you know. So I'll just leave it hanging there.
We have the text.
We do have the text.
We do have the accurate.
Oh, you're wondering if we do? Yeah, that's right. And whether the first book was supposed to be there or the last book was supposed to be there, that's right. Yeah.
So it's so much arguing to get it right. And then this idea that he divided all of his dialogues in 12 sections, and there are Pythagorean notes behind every argument that create dissonance when the opinions are to be disagreed with, and then consonance when the opinions are to be accepted. I don't know, maybe I'm not musically trained enough, but it sounds like too much.
Yeah, that does sound like too much. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. Well, but also I haven't looked into it either, and so I would say, but these divisions in half, and this division at the golden
Yeah,
ratio.
fair enough. Yeah,
you know,
these ones I wouldn't put it past Plato, but I have to be perfectly honest. I've been swearing so much last year when I was writing that piece.
Yes.
Because I was trying to figure it out. And I said to my son, okay, sit on the piano and teach me the Pythagorean thinking. I want to understand it, how it sounds.
Yeah.
That much, the geometric version
Yeah.
of the Pythagorean tetractys, I understood. I was happy with that you can kind of replicate it forever and ever and ever, even if you have I don't know how many notes on the piano. The rest of it, my God, is just like, no, there comes a point that I'm like, I must finish this. I don't want to know more about that.
Yeah.
It was painful, I have to say.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
There was a hand back there.
Okay.
Yes,
You choose
it's fine,
it.
you can go.
No, please.
Please, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Eva. I have two questions. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind explaining again the relationship between the Pythagoras, the triangle, the
Tetractys?
yes, the Plato's lambda, and then musical harmony.
Yes.
And then the second question is, so it looked like Pythagoras was talking about the soul in silence. Was Plato in line with that as well, or was he more for the soul in sound? Or
I think it's easier to start with the second question. Pythagoras does say a lot about silence. Plato doesn't say much. Neoplatonists do. Plotinus comes back to the topic of silence and insists that the union with the one can only happen in silence. But Plato does not really talk a lot about it. In the Phaedrus, you have the description of how the souls of the gods drive their chariots to the uppermost section of the sky, rise above it, enjoy a divine feast, and later come back. We hear nothing as to whether there is sound. However, in the Timaeus, when he uses all the Pythagorean principles that we mentioned, the division in three, the harmony that he mentions, he doesn't point to any sound. He uses Pythagorean principles, but there is no music to compare the creation to. So I can visualize what putting together the various parts of the soul may have looked like. We can mathematically project it, bits and pieces from the same, the different, and the being, but we can't compare it to any noise or sound. So it seems that while Pythagoras was talking about harmony that will eventually come to silence, Plato seems to have embraced silence straight away at the cosmic level. That's as much as I would conjecture. Now, to go back to the tetractys. The tetractys is a symbol of how, in 4 lines, you can put the first decad, the numbers of the first decad. The lambda is a geometric projection of that, which goes beyond Pythagoras' initial appreciation of the cosmos and the mathematical understanding of the cosmos. We don't know whether Pythagoras wrote anything on harmony, but we do know that he was obsessed with musical numerology, and that his followers, particularly Philolaus and Archytas, did write on harmonics. So we presume that Plato borrowed the arithmetic understanding of the universe from Pythagoras, because he refers to Pythagoras in his dialogues by name. We assume that he had read Philolaus, because his own nature was published by the time that Plato was writing, was composing his dialogues. So we have the harmonic, we have the Pythagorean, and that he added to that, influenced by other contemporary developments in science, the geometric version. And I think he added the geometric version of the Tetractys to account for the multiplicity of souls. Because at some point, if the Tetractys, the first 10 numbers are in this particular sequence, and the souls borrow from this sequence, or the demiurge borrows from this sequence to create the individual souls, then there will be a limited number of souls, and at some point souls will have to be repeated. But you can't argue that. You have to allow for souls to have a new kind of remuneration, a new kind of constitution forever, every time. Unless you want to say that George, with this certain soul constitution, will be repeated in 3 generations. And then after another 4 generations, there will be another George exactly the same. Or his soul will be exactly the same. The geometric version of the Tetractys allows for this to be proliferated forever. Different souls to come into existence.
That's the concept of infinity you were talking about.
Yes. Yes, I think. Yeah.
And if you want a more mathematical or geometric explanation of that, we have, if you send us a link through context page, or send us a message through the context page or something, I can send you a video of one of our classes, like an hour and a half, going through the Tetractys and the Lamboid and what's going on there. I mean, probably even one thing to mention there is the ratio between 1:2 is the octave,
Yes.
and then 2:3, which is a very important ratio for Plato in the Timaeus, and also for the development of the white keys on our keyboard, which is the first time we see
The
that.
1/5, the
The
2:3 ratio.
basically the white keys in your octave. The first time we see that, those ratios used, they've been changed slightly over the years. First time we see them mentioned, is in the Timaeus, in this discussion of the division of the soul, cutting the soul up,
Yeah.
that Eva's been talking about today. So it is quite extraordinary, and we get deep into the geometry of it. If that's what your question was about, I can send you a video about that if you send us a
I'll write to
message.
you, yes.
All right, so, yeah.
I just had 2 questions. One was about, just going back to the robust discussion we had earlier about that controversial theory about things being
Kennedy?
invented. Yeah. I guess, I've never heard of this before, though I've heard about, other sort of, not really hidden, but not really hidden meanings in Plato's writing, like, someone's walking up a hill and that means something, or there's 5 people there and like that means something. So I suppose, I guess if this theory were true, like, why do that? Why, hide meaning in the first letter or syllable of each line, I suppose? Because that, the argument's interesting, but why wouldn't it do that? Yeah.
Well, there has been a lot of discussion about allegory in Plato, and why did he like it so much? Now, later on, with Christianity, you can almost understand it because it was persecuted for so long, so to hide meanings in what would appear simple narrative would make sense. Even though the Christians definitely liked allegory enough to keep it after the 4th century, after they had been recognized as an official religion. But going back to Plato, don't forget that in essence he is a very fearful man. He has witnessed a regime he really doesn't like and he's been critical of.
Socrates.
Yes, put Socrates to death. From that point onward, it makes more sense for Plato to hide the philosophical meanings because Socrates argued that it's fine to be unconventionally pious, and that brought about his conviction. Plato, especially in the Laws, tries very, very hard to prove that philosophy is the highest form of piety. That alone tells you that he's concerned. He has an anxiety that he wants to address. Could that be enough for him to include hidden messages throughout his dialogues? We also know he had the tendency of going back and reworking his dialogues. So what we now have is the final version of something that has been reworked over 20 years or so. So could he have changed his mind about being too obvious or too honest about something and then hide it just to be on the safe side? I think that's where all this speculation about Plato hiding messages in his works stems from.
Would it also be secret societies like the Pythagoreans, and they hid their golden ratio and that sort of thing?
I'm not sure if that, well, if you accept that he followed Pythagoras, and we have enough evidence to believe that he was certainly familiar with Pythagoras and would want to engage with his ideas in his dialogues, the question is, being familiar with somebody's theories doesn't necessarily mean embracing the style of the secret society that Pythagoras allegedly had created. You see how many assumptions upon assumptions may be compounded. So I don't think that Plato ever thought of his philosophy as a secret society. He wouldn't have created the academy if it was a secret society. It was publicly open. There isn't any initiation, or we don't hear about any of that. His later students don't seem to be fearful. I think this is something that Plato carried from his own experience, his own generation, his time. Later on, people are a little bit more relaxed, I think.
Sorry, I missed the first half of the lecture. Just looking at the lambda, can you fill it out as a tetractys? 2 times 3 equals 6. 4 times 3 equals 12. 9 times 2, or even 6 times 3 equals 18.
Yes, and it has been, I think it has been discussed, it has been suggested. Yes, I believe you can.
I think in
But I don't know how to
Mechanicus fills it out a bit. But there's also the geometric mean between these is 9 and 8, 8 on 9. And so that becomes really important for the whole of the black notes. But there's a lot. There's a lot in there that we can't get into today, and I do recommend people want to
But I
study this
think in
more.
terms of the lambda, correct me if I'm wrong, and the reason they don't close the triangle is because they want to point to its infinite possibilities.
Right.
I would.
It can keep going. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And the ratios. Yeah. But then you can do stuff in here.
Yeah.
I can tell you about that in other classes. It's too complicated for Spain.
Certainly for me, I can tell you that much.
Yeah. Now, how are we going? Anyone else before we finish?
If we have time, I do.
Yeah, one more's fine. Yeah, and then we can have some tea.
Yeah, the bit mentioned about Proclus proposing like two sort of levels.
Types of music, the higher and the lower, yeah.
Yeah, I've never heard about that before. So sort of one is for sort of mass consumption, though within this like ideal state, and the second is for I guess more like initiated, aware people, philosophers, so on. Do we know any more about that?
Oh, plenty. The Neoplatonics are fascinated. They have this scale of virtues, and typically political virtue, which can be compared to a certain type of music or a certain type of civic harmony, features in there as a basic step before you move into the ascent and the invisible realities. So Plotinus doesn't say much, but he says enough about political virtue. Proclus says much more. So I think that his division between the virtues corresponds his division of types of music, in the sense that, and you see that already in the laws, everybody can access the music between the stars, the music that orders the cosmos, to the ability of each. You do need the leaders to make sure that the whole city moves to the right direction and there is a certain level of ethical training, but you cannot expect everyone to be able to join the nocturnal council, for example, where really the philosophical principles of law will have to be debated. And I think this is something that the Neoplatonics take to heart. It's part of their tradition. I believe it is repeated also in the Amblicus, later on in Simplicius. But there is a long line where this pattern is reiterated.
Okay. Eva, thank you very much.
Thank you for the
Eva, us Platonists are going to stick together.
Yes.
So we've had you back twice, and that was a wonderful talk once again. And we just hope you stay in touch, and when you do new material, you seem to be doing new material all the time, that you bring it to us, because we love having you here, and we love to think that there is a very serious Plato scholar in this city that we can always call on. So thank you very much. I've got something hidden under here. Just a token of our appreciation for giving this talk. Okay. I can open it, yes. Okay, so.
Oh, beautiful. So nice. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, that's just our postcard, but we've got a book voucher.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think last time was wine, but you were doing Plato and drunkenness, so I thought that was appropriate, but maybe wine is always appropriate, I'm not sure.
No, I'll tell you. Wine is certainly not appropriate because for the rest of the year I'm under the thumb to produce a book on something completely different by people who have been paying me for 3 years now. So I better deliver.
Yeah, right, so no hangovers.
I keep escaping to Plato, but at some point they will pull me by the, they will say, where is the book? So thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Eva. And also I'd like to, while we're here, just thank members of the Platonic Academy.